Hello.
Everyone's so sedate.
Hi. Hello, everybody. We just opened the waiting room, so welcome.
Hi, Nancy. Good to see you.
Hi, Leilani.
Hi, Leilani. Hi.
Oh, they all know each other.
Very wonderful to see
Everybody
you.
knows each other.
all know each other.
Kathy, I haven't seen you for years. Michael Caldwell, good to see you.
Oh, Michael, thank
Hi,
you for
Laura.
coming. So great to see you.
Hi, George.
Hey,
Hi, Byron. Byron, nice
There's
to see you.
138 people so far.
Hi, Judith. Hi, Judith Cloud. Nice to see you.
Drexel, Hillary, aloha.
Hi, Harvey.
Oh,
Hi.
Oh, Mara.
Nice to have you. Thank you, Shira.
Who are all these?
I'm not the only one.
Hi, Josh. Nice to see you.
Louise, good to see you.
Hey, Cheryl.
Hello.
There they are.
Hi, Jen.
There's 160 participants.
Yeah, there's Jen right there.
Try it again.
160. Yeah.
I was just,
You
I
asked.
was just talking to you, talking about you,
Hi,
Pat.
Laura. Welcome.
Hi, Patricia.
Moving. Hi, Robin. Welcome. Oh, hi, Roxanne. Hello. Welcome.
Your videos are.
Gary, you made it.
Hi, Byron.
Gary, Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl.
You have no idea.
Oh, hi, Jen. Savannah.
Linda
dancing.
Dang.
You in the chat.
That's awesome.
See if I know anyone.
Donna McGurk and Brian.
Everybody's
Everyone I don't know.
Elizabeth.
For all the chat.
Elizabeth, Bob.
Harvey, great to see you.
Everyone's just saying hi to each other.
Hi,
They may have been
Saul.
invited. It also may be a way to.
Hello, Maggie. Aaron Morningstar.
I just wanted to say hi.
Oh, Donna. Hi, Donna.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Jeannie. Hi, Jeannie.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Leilani.
Why were they there?
Linda.
Hi,
Hi, Barry.
Robin Holtzman. Hi, Robin.
Natty. Hi, Natty.
Hi.
Elizabeth, you're always the center of attention.
Why did this come up? Where? Am I in or not?
Hi, Sharon. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Howard. Welcome.
Amy's on there,
Part of it
Robin's
now?
on there.
No, I know your business work. It says it's in sync.
It leads to, yeah, this is, but it.
Your video's not on.
Did I put it on?
Hello,
Start video.
Nancy. Welcome.
We're not making any. We're not.
Donna. Hi, Donna.
No.
Hi, Nat. Welcome.
You might not
Aloha,
know.
Karen. Nice to see you, but you're back.
Hi, Alex. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, Melissa. Welcome. Hi.
Well done.
Great to see you.
What a groove.
Hi, Dory. Welcome.
There's David and
Hi,
Mike.
Robbie. Welcome.
Tracy called me.
Hi, Meryl. I think I see you.
Wow.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Hi, Amy. Steve. Chuck. Great to see you.
Maybe that's just so Nathan, Mike.
Wow.
Sarah.
Steve Hosson
Cute. This
is
is
the
cute.
co-host
Ben, I
of
saw
this.
you. Great to
He
see
is
you.
a leading expert in
Cult activity.
Aaron, I love your backdrop.
and he recognizes that
It's real.
that's a cult.
Be the star of the show.
Where are you?
Is he related to the concert? You can't see.
Hello, Mara.
Hi,
It's exciting.
I don't think so.
How are ya?
Right,
Elizabeth is in the host committee.
I think we should get started.
Is a middle name.
He's committed a crime.
We have everybody mute themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, you move around.
And
His own
manipulative.
call. Moved around on his own call.
Organizational.
I mean, it could be Raskin. I said no. I haven't.
That works. I just muted everybody. Thank you and welcome. Dana, we can take the opening slide down now because we're going to, I just use that as a cue to get everybody to pay attention a little bit. Hi, my name is Janet Naherney. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself in a few minutes. But at the moment, I want to hand it off to Kathy Lubar for a welcome. And thank you all for coming.
Wow, this is incredible. It's just so exciting to see all of you here. And on behalf of myself and my 14 co-hosts, welcome. We just couldn't imagine this turnout is fantastic. And I have some very exciting news to start off with, which is that we have already raised $10,000. And in addition, we are going to add $50 for every participant who comes tonight. So as a host committee, as you know, we've committed to give $50 to every guest. And we're going to be looking at this participant. Right now we're at 280, but we'll be looking at that number and we will match whatever the highest number is tonight. So with the $10,000 and with the match that we're giving, we have already raised $25,000, almost $25,000 tonight, and we haven't even started the event. So we are so optimistic about the outcome of tonight. So this is my third fundraiser for MVP, and I am convinced that this is the very best use of my time and resources. So this year, I personally gave more to MVP than I ever have, in fact, probably to any organization, because I believe that this election is the most crucial election of my lifetime. And my husband, George, and I realized that we could either leave more in an inheritance to our daughters and leave them a world becoming more and more authoritarian and globally warming Earth, or we could give as generously as we could to MVP now and know that we've done everything we can to leave them a democracy, women's rights, a healthy planet, and just to mention a few. So I believe that our best chance to do that is through the grassroots organizations in the battleground states that MVP is supporting. And I think it's these very organizations that really were game changers in the last two elections.
The dentist for all that work.
So we are very pleased about the program tonight. We have a special guest, Dr. Stephen Hassan, who wrote The Cult of Trump, in conversation with Alva Johnson and Rich Logis, who were leaders in the Trump organization and broke away from the Trump cult. And they have fascinating stories to tell you. And before we go to that, I just want to give a shout out to Leanne Grillo and Janet Naherney, who are MVP volunteers extraordinaire. And we have had the great opportunity of working with Janet over the last 3 fundraisers. And she is going to share now, give you a real look at what MVP and the groups on the ground are doing right now and what the strategy is for this most important election year. So thank you all for coming.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Hi, I'm Janet Naherney, as I said before. Dana, if you don't mind going ahead and putting up the first couple of slides, please. Thanks. So before we get started, as Kathy was so nice to thank Leanne and me, we want to thank this unbelievable host committee for bringing we have 275 people so far in this Zoom. That it's just amazing, the work of the host committee. Thank you so, so much. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how you might be part of the next host committee for MVP. Just a little teaser. Also, just want to shout out to the other volunteers. In addition to Leanne, we have Dana Brooks and Eileen Sullivan helping us here tonight. Thank you so much, Dana and Leanne. Sorry, Dana and Eileen. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of our agenda tonight. We're going to talk about MVP. Some of you might have heard about MVP before. Some of you might be new to it. We have something for every flavor. Then, as Kathy said, we're going to have a conversation with Steve Hassan, the author of Cult of Trump, along with Alva Johnson and Rich Logis. We're going to have a special musical selection by a group called What the World Needs Now from one of our co-hosts, Belle Halpern. And we are going to have time at the end for Q&A. But before we start, and if you want to take the slides down just for a second, Dana, thanks. I just want to give you a little bit of an introduction about me and why I'm here. I'm Janet Naherney. Like I said, I live in Brookline, Massachusetts. I'm an MVP volunteer. I'm a former federal prosecutor turned stay-at-home mom, and was not really, I kind of watched politics from the sidelines for a long time. And then my wake-up call came probably the same as some of you the morning after Trump got elected. I couldn't even stay up to watch the results that night. So it was the next morning. At the time, my 3 children were teenagers, and my first thought was, I had failed my children. Sorry, get a little bit choked up. It was, a really meaningful moment. And I figured I really needed to roll up my sleeves and do something, because when you failed your children as a parent, and even if you're not a parent, I'm sure you understand that you have to do something to make it right. I really could not stomach the idea that we had elected that person as president. So I looked around, I went to candidate fundraisers, I wrote postcards, I knocked on doors, phone banks, the whole works, and all of it gratifying, but nothing anywhere near as gratifying as finding MVP. And when this literally was at a fundraiser that somebody handed me a flyer about MVP, and I took it home and read it that night, and I was like, done. I know exactly where I want to devote my time and my resources. And I hope that after I finish tonight, you'll understand why. Most of all, MVP brings me hope and makes me feel good about our future. And I think we all need a little bit more of that these days. All right, let's get started. We're going to have some slides in a minute.
Do you want to say something about the matches?
Oh, I do want to say something about the matches. Thank you. Thank you, Leanne. I knew I would forget. So before we start about what's at stake tonight is, in addition to the fundraising that Kathy mentioned, we have 2 amazing matches. One is $10,000 for the first $10,000 raised tonight will be matched 1-to-1 by a couple of generous donors. And then secondly, there's one donor who really wants everyone to think about digging particularly deeply this year, right now, and has offered $10,000 to be given for $1,000 for every gift that comes in at $1,000 or more for the first 10 of those gifts. So if you give $2,000, it's $3,000. If you give $5,000, it becomes $6,000. So we have those 2 matches. They're running starting tonight. They didn't apply before, but they apply to anything raised tonight at this event. So thank you. Thank you for that reminder, Leanne. And now here are our slides. So what's at stake? I think we all know what's at stake. This is what's at stake. We really cannot afford to have this nightmare scenario. We cannot have a Trump victory, a MAGA Congress, not only 4 years of a nightmare, but the damage that will be wrought to both our democracy and our planet are really unthinkable and would last much longer than 4 years. On the other hand, it could be amazing. We could have a blue wave election, and I'm going to tell you about how we've been heading that way already. We could pass bold policy. We could see voting rights finally enacted at the federal level. They were enacted before, but they've been chipped away. We could have them reenacted in a stronger manner. We could have fair House maps. We could have reproductive rights, bigger Democratic majorities at the state level as well. And here's the difference. Just a few thousand votes. As we know, both 2016 and 2020 were decided by just 3 states and tiny, tiny margins. And here's how we're going to get those few thousand votes to go in our direction. This is from the New York Times. I know there's a lot of commentary these days about the New York Times and their headlines, and I agree with a lot of it. This article came out on January 1st of this year by Nate Cohn, who's the political pollster for the New York Times. And he wrote about 5 things that will shape the 2024 election. And here is what he said about the new swing vote. The voters poised to decide the election look very, very different from swing voters of lore. They're disproportionately young, Black, and Hispanic. So how are we going to reach those young Black and Hispanic voters? We're going to show you a short video about MVP to help you find out.
I think they're a factor too, but maybe they're just not as
All
big a
those states
factor.
that swung blue in 2020, grassroots organizing did that. And MVP funded that. That's what MVP does. We know what kind of really hasn't necessarily worked in politics, which is you support candidates, money gets parachuted in that last minute, volunteers get parachuted in that last minute.
When the election's over, they pull out, and there's nothing left to build on.
What MVP does, which I think is so powerful, is invests year-round in community groups that are connected to regular people, using that relationship to turn people out to vote.
They focus primarily on communities of color and youth, people that can make the difference in swing states.
These are the groups that have long-term relationships. When they knock on the door, the person on the other side is responding to someone that they know. That's how you're going to be able to turn people out, because you have such trust that has been built.
We know our struggles and we know our communities.
This is not only a place we go organize, this is our home.
It's about us. This is our power. We build the power.
We are out here trying to do deep organizing, and this is a movement.
Racism, climate change, the tax on abortion, voting rights. There is a real crisis of democracy. I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed and helpless. People are not powerless.
You want to elect better people and you want to build power for the long term. This is like the one place you go to give your donation.
All of the magic that's happening by those groups getting the dollars that they need right when they need it.
It's really rare to be trusted as people of color, to be trusted as women, and to be trusted as young people, to know our communities best.
You are doing something very direct with your privilege and your money.
We want our donors to wake up the day after the election with no regrets. We all have our part in the work of building the better world where we can all thrive.
So that video gave you a great sense of the work that MVP does, but I also want to give you a sense of the scope of MVP. Since 2019, MVP has moved $81 million. That's more than Nikki Haley raised in her entire campaign. $81 million to over 600 groups in over 40 states. And I want to make a point about why we say money moved, because the money that you give to MVP goes directly to the groups on the ground. We do not keep it for administrative expenses. We raise those separately. Here are our investment priorities. This is kind of in its simplest form. We like to say MVP invests in the people and places that matter. The people are young people, voters of color, and LGBTQ. They're historically marginalized. They vote at lower rates, and we really need them to turn out and vote. The places are the swing states where the races are close and where we can get some long-term gains. And we turn out voters, not just for one election, but up and down the ballot for everybody running. So I don't want to spend too much time on the negatives, but traditional political giving doesn't really work the way that we think it does. First of all, a vast majority of money given to candidates goes to TV ads and digital marketing. And most of those simply don't resonate with voters. They don't reach voters where they are. Secondly, campaigns are often compared to sandcastles. That's the reason we have a sandcastle picture there. And the idea is that campaigns swoop into communities, they rent out office space, they hire short-term staff, they even order local takeout or use the local dry cleaners for a period of 3 months or maybe 6 months at best. And then when the election's over, win or lose, they leave everything behind empty, no long-term impact on that community. So here's why local organizing works better. First of all, local organizers know their neighbors. Local organizers are in groups that are recognized by their community members. And in fact, that's actually tonight's event is an example of local organizing. You would not have come to this event if you had received an invitation from MVP directly. You came to this event because somebody that you know reached out to you and you trust them. They're a trusted messenger, and they said, I think this is a good idea. Why don't you come? You're going to like it. And that's why you're here. Local organizers play the same role in their communities. Also, issues motivate voters. We like to talk a lot about the politics of personality and the ages of candidates, but at the end of the day, voters turn out because of issues they care about. I only need to say 2 words, reproductive rights, because we've seen a lot of elections decided with a lot of turnout for voters motivated to protect reproductive rights over the past 2 years. Lastly, organizers build power that grows every year. So grassroots groups are in their communities year in and year out, and they're building relationships not only with their community members, but also with the elected officials who recognize the power that these groups have. There are no sandcastles here. And I just want to explain the photo in this slide because it's a great example of what happened. Thanks, Dana. What happened of a victory that happened outside of the election cycle. This is a group down home, North Carolina, a group that we fund that are dedicated to building political power in small towns and rural communities in North Carolina. Together with the governor, they played a leading role against a Republican legislature in North Carolina, passing legislation recently that brought Medicaid expansion to over 600,000 new residents. So the picture is the organizers together with the governor because they knew that without the other, they could not have gotten that bill passed. So we've talked about local organizing, but what makes MVP a unique player in this world? First of all, we have a state advisor team. We have state advisors on the ground in every top priority state. They are working together with our groups, helping their groups develop strategies for voter turnout. They're providing support to groups, and we're going to go into a little bit further about exactly what our state organizers do. Our state organizers provide on-the-ground expertise. They are experienced organizers from the communities where they're working. They're on the ground, and one of the key things they do is actually vet the groups that we select. So they know the groups personally, they're working with them, they understand the role they play in their communities. We're also helping groups build capacity. We're not just funding, but we're offering them tech expertise, legal expertise, consulting, leadership development, anything they need to do their jobs as effectively as possible. I did mention leadership development. We're working with leaders at the ground level to make them as effective as possible. And then lastly, we're working, our state advisors are in charge of evaluating the groups, making sure they're actually doing what we need them to do, and helping the groups collaborate with each other. And when they collaborate with each other, we get state ecosystems. So what our organizers are doing, our state advisors are doing, is bringing groups together within a state so that they're working together collaboratively, helping each other grow stronger, sharing best practices, making sure they're not duplicating efforts. And that's one of the magic things that happens with our state advisors on the ground. But the MVP is not just great for the organizations, but also great for donors. We like to say MVP is your one-stop shop for investing strategically in local organizations around the country to turn out voters and win elections. And how do we do that? We have our state advisors doing the research. They're maximizing your impact. They're making funding decisions every 2 weeks. So if one race is getting tighter and another race isn't, we can divert funds and invest somewhere else. We streamline everyone's giving, and you can also click no to all of those emails you get from candidates. So does it work? This is kind of a question I asked myself because I joined MVP in 2018 and we didn't have so much of a track record at that point. But look what happened in 2020. So these were our top tier states in 2020. All 5 of these states had gone for Trump in 2016. MVP prioritized funding to groups in these states, and all 5 of them went for Biden in 2020. You can see by some very tiny margins. So we're going to dig in a little bit to 2 of those states. That's Michigan on the left and Wisconsin on the right. And across the country in 2020, voter turnout set records. It went up across the country. But what this slide shows is that across the country, as in Michigan and Wisconsin, voter turnout increased by more or less 3%. But in these states where MVP was focusing its efforts, voter turnout for voters of color increased by almost double the average of turnout. So voters of color in Michigan increased by 6.8% and voters of color in Wisconsin by 5.2%. And young voters increased by astonishing margins in those 2 states. Look at Michigan, 14.1% increase in young voter turnout. In Wisconsin, almost 16%. And you probably don't remember from the slide before, but Wisconsin was only won by 20,000 votes. So I named this slide after the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, because one of the nice things about investing in MVP is that you're covering all races everywhere. So in 2022, we named our campaign Defy the Odds. We fought back the red wave, and we did in fact defy the odds. We actually gained a seat in the Senate. We won state trifectas in Michigan and Minnesota. And we only lost the House by a few seats. Then in 2023, our groups are on the ground at work year round, so they're ready for special elections, for off-cycle elections. In Wisconsin, we were there to help support the victory for the Supreme Court seat, which is going to have ramifications for years to come, with a 4-3 majority now that can prevent gerrymandering, help secure reproductive rights for that state. In Ohio, they had 2 special elections about reproductive rights, and our groups were on the ground in Ohio, turning out an astonishing number of voters to make sure that those ballot measures did not pass. And in Virginia, in November 2023, we showed Glenn Youngkin who was in charge, and we turned both state houses blue. So I want to move ahead to our 2024 strategies and priorities and tell you what you can do to make an impact. So we have 9 top priority states right now: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, which has a key Senate seat, and Montana, also with a key Senate seat. So those are going to be our top priority states. But as you can see from this map, we're also investing in our tier 2 states, Texas, Florida, Maine, New Hampshire. We cover them all. We just cover them at different levels of priority. And here's our plan, our field plan for this year. So there's a reason we're here in March and not waiting until October, which is when most political giving happens. First of all, we're in the phase 1 right now. We're in Catalyze. We're developing strategies with our groups. We're helping them build capacity. We're recruiting staff and volunteers. The next stage we're calling Galvanize, from April to June. Identify and register voters, training our volunteers and our staff, and advancing policies before legislatures so that we know where our elected officials stand. In July to September, the all-important Mobilize phase. That's when we really are doing voter engagement work, voter persuasion. Some early voting even starts in September, or we're certainly getting our voters ready for early voting. And then lastly, the end game, October to December. That is when the get out the vote work is the most critical. We also might have to be gearing up for election protection work, and as well as campaign evaluation. And this is our message for this year, because 2024 is a year like no other. We have 2 candidates that a lot of people are not excited about, and we need to figure out how to get them to vote for Biden and turn out to vote. So one thing is human connection. That's what our groups are the best at. They're reaching out to people where they are, finding out what issues are important to them and connecting with them on that level. Number 2, personal storytelling, understanding again what's unique and important to each individual voter and how we can connect their story to the importance of voting. Number 3, we have to make it about Trump. We cannot ignore the fact that the risk of his presidency is simply too great for all of us. Number 4, highlight the Biden good stuff. I know it's hard, and there are people that have a lot of different ideas about Biden and his age and Gaza and a lot of other things, but we have to focus on the fact that Biden has been a pretty darn good president for the past 4 years. The economy is good. The jobs are good. There are a lot of terrific policies that he's passed in the last 4 years. And number 5 is getting voters to focus on what their vision is for 2025 and beyond. What kind of world do they want to see, and what kind of leader can help them get there? So what can you do? We're going to talk about donating and organizing. We'd love you to give big tonight, and I don't imagine that a lot of people here can give $100,000, but it'd be great if you could. But just as an example, $100,000 would buy one 30-second national TV ad for a candidate, probably a negative ad, by the way, or fund 2 organizers full-time, working now through Election Day, connecting with voters, registering voters, making sure they turn out, knocking on all those doors. And just think about when you vote, focus on the voter and not the candidate. You actually turn out a voter that votes for all of these races, not just one, but all of them, all the way from president down to school board. In terms of organizing, everyone here is someone's trusted messenger. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, there are a few people here who came to an event like this just 5 or 6 weeks ago and said, yes, I want to get involved. And now they're inviting you tonight. So that's a role that you can play. We have Zoom events going on all the time. We also can do in-person events if you're in one of the areas where we have active volunteers. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and you can email me directly. We're also going to put up a poll later that you can show your interest, but your impact could be made so much greater, not just with your individual gift, but by inviting your friends to share and understand more about MVP. So our executive director used this quote in a newsletter not that long ago: winning in 2024 is going to cost money, but not winning will cost infinitely more. It's really going to take everything we've got, but the cost to our country, to our democracy, to our planet of not winning, to me, that's staggering. Honestly, I don't even let myself go there often, but it does inspire me to keep doing this work and give as generously as I can. So thank you. We have the donation link in the chat and up here on this QR code as well. And I hope that you're all grateful that someone was willing to reach out to you and invite you here. You can also be that person for others in your network. I'm going to leave you with a quick moment of inspiration from the incredible Rebecca Solnit. She says, "Hope is not a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. It's an axe that you break down doors with in an emergency. Hope should shove you out the door because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures and the grinding down of the poor and marginal. To hope is to give yourself to the future, and that commitment to the future is what makes the present inhabitable." So we simply can't afford to have anyone sit on the sidelines or on their couches clutching hope like a lottery ticket this year. We have to grab our figurative, not actual axes and do everything we can to give as much as we can, organize our own communities, make sure everybody hears about MVP, shout it from the rooftops. The stakes are simply that high. I'm going to turn it over now to Lori Katz for a quick message, and then we'll get to hear from Steve, Alva, and Rich.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see so many people here. I'm Laurie Raskin-Katz, and this is my third time, along with Kathy Lubar, that I've been a co-host for an MVP fundraiser. It's because I continue to believe that they have a winning strategy for getting out the vote. One of our co-hosts, Jamie, sort of spontaneously came up with this slogan for MVP at one of our meetings. It's year-round, on the ground. And that means that MVP is on top of the data and the changing trends all year long, so they can pinpoint where our donations will go to make the greatest impact. Now, I can't do that on a level of detailed analysis for myself, but I trust MVP to do it for me. Never in my lifetime did I think I'd see this threat to our democracy and such an assault on our rights. I have children and grandchildren. I want them to be able to continue to live in a democracy, but now I realize that I can't take that for granted. I'm tuned into the news, which is hard, and I try to turn my feelings of helplessness into action. So hosting a party like this with so many of you in attendance gives me hope. Maybe, like me, you've written postcards, driven people to the polls, knocked on doors, made calls. Maybe you've been a poll worker or volunteered for candidates in local elections. Those down ballot races are so important to the issues affecting our daily lives. All of that is so important and so admirable, but maybe you want to do more. If you're inspired by what you're hearing here this evening, please, please tell your friends about MVP. You can even host a party like Janet was saying, a party like this one, or you can partner with others who are planning a Zoom party. We ended up with a number of co-hosts who joined in as we got going with this event, and that's because they recently attended a Zoom party in Vermont. So the MVP staff, like Janet and her team, make it incredibly easy for you. They have a blueprint that you can follow, and they assist you every step of the way. We're posting Janet's contact information in the chat, and if you have questions or you want to follow up, she's there to chat with you. It's really something to consider. It's amazing. We've been raising a lot of money all night. I see in the chat people donating here and there, right and left. It's great. We're so appreciative to all of you. We hope you'll continue to be inspired to work for our democracy and donate as generously as you can tonight. Thanks again, everybody, for being here.
Thanks, Lori. While I'm going to introduce Steve, Alva, and Rich in just a second, we're actually going to throw up a poll very quickly that will just, if for anybody who's interested in perhaps hosting an event or getting further involved. And while the poll is up, I I just want to tell you the easiest way to get the poll off your screen is to complete it. So please complete the poll if you can. And while it's going on, I am going to take the moment to introduce Steve Hassan, Alva Johnson, and Rich Logis. We're really, that's a lot of reallys, really excited to have them here tonight. Steve Hassan is the author of The Cult of Trump. And as we all know, Trump is a cult. Like, I know we're all dumbfounded at people and how they end up following Trump and continuing to support him despite all of the pretty heinous things that he's done. Steve and Alva and Rich are going to unpack that for us a little bit. I'm really excited to hear from them. We're going to leave the poll up for just 1 second, but in the meantime, I want to hand it over to Steve to get us started on that part of the program.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and excited that this organization exists. And I guess I want to say that Alva and Rich and I have way more than 20 minutes to share with you, but to just give you frames, I will tell you that when I was asked to write The Cult of Trump, all I knew was that Donald Trump was a malignant narcissist. By the way, I grew up 1.3 miles from him in Flushing, Queens. So I knew he was, and I wrote chapter 3 in the book, comparing him with Jim Jones, Hubbard of Scientology, and Moon of the Moonies. And why I chose the Moonies is because 50 years ago, I was recruited at Queens College into a front group of this right-wing extremist cult. And I was hacked, and I became a right-wing fascist. And I believed that democracy was satanic, and we had to infiltrate Congress and change the Constitution. All the things that are happening now have been a long-planned event with many different authoritarian groups. So in addition to the malignant narcissist frame of the cult leader, there are actual cults that are puppet masters of Donald Trump who are bringing their base of New Apostolic Reformation, the family, Opus Dei, neo-Nazis, and Putin has recruited Trump decades ago. I don't understand why the media isn't covering this. This is a well-established fact. But the critical thing I want to say is that people's minds are hacked. The media keeps saying that Trump believers are impervious and there's nothing that can be done to help them. That's BS. I know because I was rescued. My sister and brother-in-law are on the Zoom who helped rescue me in 1976. And I've been fighting for 47 years, written 4 books, did a doctoral dissertation on undue influence. So the key is understanding undue influence or brainwashing, explaining it to everybody, explaining how to protect their own minds, especially in this digital world, and all the people who've cut off contact with their family, friends, coworkers because they got into conspiracy theories or the cult of Trump. These folks need to understand warm relationships, reaching out, being educated how to do this is going to pull a lot of people who are, I believe, doubting. You're going to meet a former true believer, Rich Logis, in a minute, and he'll share his story. And Alva was actually a campaign manager and director for Trump in 2015 and 16. So she has incredible knowledge and information. But what I want to say is that we are fighting for human rights. This is authoritarianism versus human rights and democratic institutions. And so take the frame out of Biden and Trump, in my opinion, and focus on the values. Like, what kind of world do we want our children and our grandchildren to live? There's so much more I want to say, but let me introduce you to Alva Johnson, who has got an incredible story. And I interviewed these 2 brave, courageous patriots on my Freedom of Mind blog, if you want a longer interview after this. And the 3 of us are committed and passionate to try to take our knowledge and experience and share it with everybody who wants to save our country. And with that, can I introduce you, Alva, and ask you to say a bit about yourself, and then Rich? who is starting an ex-member group called Leaving MAGA. Go,
Yes.
go Alva.
Hi, Steve, and hello, everyone. I'm just really thrilled to be a part of MVP. I am a political strategist. Grassroots wins elections, and so groups like MVP are so important in order to be able to save our democracy. I ended up working for Trump in 2015. I was probably one of the first 60 people on the campaign payroll. I was hired by Cora Lewandowski, worked through Dave Bossi's, Paul Manafort, and Steve Bannon. I'm one of the few people that probably worked underneath all of them. I was considered one of the OGs, one of the original loyalists. I started off what I thought was just going to be me throwing a rally. And so I threw a rally in Alabama. 32,000 people showed up. Jeff Sessions endorsed him. And then from there, I found myself thrust into the middle of a political campaign. When I joined the campaign, he was polling 18th. So I didn't think he had a chance of actually winning. And so from there, I traveled to 9 states. I was a director of the ground game, organizing, mobilizing people. I helped to identify and build all of the interest groups like Women for Trump, Blacks for Trump, Latinos for Trump, Chinese for Trump. I mean, there were over 50 interest groups that were identified and built. And then for Florida, for the general election, ended up going to Florida and creating probably one of the most successful election projects of all of 2016. I left the campaign the day that Access Hollywood happened. I left the campaign because I'm also one of the 25 plus women that have also accused him of being inappropriate with me. And so after that, I was in litigation with him from 2018 until 2022, where he wanted to hold the non-disclosure agreement over me. They wanted to keep me silent for a reason. They fought me. I refused to give up, and I eventually won in March of 2022. So I was unable for many years to be able to share anything that I learned and anything that I knew. It's, you know, working in a campaign, it's like you work in a bubble. You only surrounded by people that say that your candidate is great. It really, when you talk about looking at your children and being able to think about what you've done, I now spend most of my time figuring out how to correct course, how to undo, and how to share what I know and what I unknowingly participated in for a candidate that I didn't think had a chance of actually winning. And so when we talk about the threat of democracy, I want us to remain optimistic first, because his chaos is a part of his pattern to kind of throw us off kilter. Remain optimistic, understand that every vote really does count. You are not powerless. There were moments when I felt that, you know, being in litigation, it was like David versus Goliath. You know, I'm fighting a person with unlimited resources, but I refuse to give up. And because I refused to give up, I didn't always win the battle, but I did eventually win the war. And so, yeah.
So Alva, you have so much to say. The Mueller investigation never even asked you about the Russian connections. There's more we'll get into in the Q&A, but I just want Rich to introduce himself and what he's up to, and then we'll do the questions and discussions. Thank you, Alva. Go, Rich.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. So happy and honored to be here. I'm a Florida resident. I'm a working class, happily married dad of 2 young girls. And I took note, Janet, about in the beginning, as you got emotional talking about the 2016 election. And I'm sorry that I actually contributed to those feelings. And I'm sure that most on here have very similar feelings. And I take responsibility for someone who did the actual work, not quite to the extent Alva did, but I did the work to help Trump get elected. I wrote part of the call script for the campaign. I helped show people where their polling places were. I made phone calls on behalf of the campaign. I even persuaded apolitical friends of mine to vote for Trump, and they were in certain swing states. So when we won, and I say when we won in 2016, I became even more, as Steve says, as a true believer. I was involved with Trump groups. I spoke at groups. I was a right-wing pundit. I had a professionally produced podcast. My work appeared in places such as Fox. And I became deeper and deeper in the MAGA world. And it was in the summer of 2021 when my doubts commenced about supporting MAGA. And it was actually not Trump who was the catalyst. It was Ron DeSantis, my governor. When he flip-flopped on COVID in the summer of 21, which if we remember, kids were starting to befall ill from COVID and they were dying. His flip-flop on COVID, it was a shock to me. And the very first emotion that set in for me was confusion. And I went through what I call a year of heaven and hell to come to the realization that I was wrong to have supported Trump, to have supported MAGA, DeSantis, and the entire movement. And one of the other reasons I left was because I better understood that the insurrection was antithetical to our democracy. And I have what I would say is bad news and good news that I would like to say in relation to the work of MVP. As someone who intimately knows and understands MAGA, a Trump re-election is going to irreparably damage our democracy. And it will mean that MAGA and the right wing have won. And because there is no nation in the history of the world like the United States, we do not know what an irreparable democracy exactly is going to look like for us. But I have good news. That's not going to happen. And for all those who are listening right now, any donation that you can make is an investment in democracy to get us in front of more voters. And the more voters we get in front of, the more voters they will get in front of, and the more voters they will get in front of. And my belief is that we are going to have, if we get the turnout and the work we do, we are going to have a historic turnout in November. And I believe that there is going to be an electoral repudiation of the Republican Party and MAGA. As I was watching all these slides, I want to just tell everyone, they reminded me of all of the volunteer meetings when I was in MAGA, the focus, the fundraising. As much as we've had technological and data advances, elections are won belly button to belly button, eyeball to eyeball. So there's a lot of details in between that. I am happy to share with everyone at any time after the event, but I just want to encourage everyone, your donation, no matter what the amount is an investment in our democracy to show people that we need to make the case to get others invested in their democracy and in their nation. So the higher the turnout, the more we continue on the perfection of this union. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. I really am humbled and grateful that you care about my own story and in leaving MAGA.
Yeah, and Rich, I just want to capitalize on the fact that I believe we could get a third of the MAGA voters to not support MAGA.
Well, if
there's a lot of knowledge here and experience, and I just want to say, Rich is starting a nonprofit called Leaving MAGA to destigmatize the fact that it's not a shameful thing to say, I did what I thought was right, and now I realize I was deceived and brainwashed, and now I'm out, and I want to fight for liberty. And Alva, your turn.
I was just going to say, if you look at what Nikki Haley was able to do, those people that voted for Nikki Haley were former MAGA people. And so even just from when she gave her concession and dropped out of the race yesterday, there was a Haley Voters for Biden Twitter account that popped up that had over 30,000 people within 24 hours. And so, yeah, elections, they're won. People want you to ask for their elections. For me, I spend my time really just putting on my strategist hat. I look at counties because you can go into some of the smallest counties that you think will go one way, but people just want you to ask for their votes. They want you to hear their stories. And so I was looking at some of the organizations that MVP supports. Black Voters Matter. I'm very familiar with them because I spent a lot of time in Georgia and Atlanta. And so I have seen the work of what that organization does, how in 2020, you would see their buses everywhere. You would see even the billboards in like small counties. You know, they were going into places that even though they were traditionally voting red, it's that you can still take votes from those counties, and those votes will help flip a whole state. So I think it's just incredible work, and I'm really happy that you guys are focusing on grassroots year round, because that's how you win elections. It's, you know, you don't just go for an election period and pull out, but you do build those relationships so that people do learn to trust you.
And I want to just add that Rich and Alva and I have talked about maybe if we get the funding to do some training videos of how to talk to people in the cult of Trump, in the MAGA world, what not to do and what is effective. And what doesn't work is calling the person names, trying to throw facts at them, being angry. What works is respectful, warm, finding common ground, asking questions, finding targets to talk about brainwashing. Like MAGA people respond to talking about Chinese communist brainwashing, which is what helped me get out of the Moonies, was realizing that brainwashing existed. And it wasn't torture, but it was psychological manipulation. And also talking about pimps and traffickers and how they groom young people and condition them and program them into servitude. They'll listen. And with my BITE model, which stands for behavior control, information, thought, and emotional control, explaining it in detail, then we can then ask questions and look at all the documentaries that are coming out on cults. They're everywhere.
They're everywhere.
But they're not explaining in a practical way what people need to understand to protect themselves, their loved ones, and also how to talk to their loved ones who've been trapped.
Okay.
Did you want to say something, Janet?
I was just going to say something quickly. I tend
Go
to
for it.
have a lot of empathy for people who have ended up a part of MAGA, because I was one of the earliest people. I would spend time talking to these voters, and a lot of these swing states and a lot of states who were coming in because they had a son addicted to opioids, or they were coming in because they, you know, were afraid of losing their Social Security. They were coming in for all of these various reasons. And I look at them now because I will just Google and look to see what they're up to. And I see the radicalization that them being siphoned into these information chambers, isolating themselves from their family, only surrounding themselves with other people that believe the same thing that they believe. And so it becomes an extension of who they are. But there is hope.
Yeah, Janet, did you want to break in, or should I ask some more questions? I actually
yeah,
wanted
let's-
you to mention, Alva, the app that you would meet people and get them online and indoctrinate them and continue to feed them.
Well, I mean, I wasn't exactly doing it.
Well,
Was,
whatever.
Yeah.
Sorry.
They had, the campaign had an app, and the app was what we used to actually go door knocking. I know I heard a lot of you talk about canvassing and knocking on doors. And so they had a personalized app where a lot of the data was being driven from Trump Tower. My responsibility was to mobilize the volunteers, but then to also give feedback in real time as to the effectiveness of the neighborhoods. I didn't realize at the time that it was pretty much micro-targeting people, which is how they kind of created the profiles of whom to target. And so for years, I was watching the cults grow, but there was nothing I could do or say about it because of the NDA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Janet, did you want to
So,
say something?
I think we have to pause it here, but I do say pause because we're all going to be available for Q&A in a minute, but I do want to give the rest of our speakers a chance to make sure we get our full agenda before 8. But we are around. Steve, Rich, and Alva are around to take questions after this. I'm going to say a huge thank you to you guys. You know, my impression when we kind of joined your program with our program was that we're kind of like in parallel lanes along the same highway. But the more I think about it, I really think our lanes very much overlap in that we rely on trust and human connection. And it's just so important to reach people where they are and not to try to bully somebody or make them feel badly, but to really understand what motivates them and get them out to vote for those reasons. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over for a minute to Sarah Katz. And then we will have our song by What the World Needs Now. But please hang around for questions after that. Thanks.
All righty. Thank you, Janet. Hi, everybody. Before I say anything else, I just want to say wow, and thank Alva, Rich, and Steve so much for being here, sharing their stories and talking about just the crucial work that they're doing to fight for a better future for all of us. It's very I feel very lucky and humbled to be able to hear all of that. So thank you. My name is Sarah, and that is a tough act to follow, but I am here tonight as a concerned citizen, as a woman, as a believer in MVP, and perhaps most relevantly for what I'm about to say, I am here as a millennial. Although I obviously can't speak for an entire generation, I want to highlight the energy shift that I am observing among younger people because I'm concerned that ignoring it would be a big mistake. When I say young people, I'm talking about the same people that got fired up during the Democratic primary before the last election, pouring their time and their energy into Pete, Bernie, Amy, Elizabeth, and so on. And then when Joe emerged as the candidate, even those who were not initially part of his campaign completely stepped into line and fought for a Democratic victory and celebrated when it was achieved. Now, all of us here understand the gravity of this election and the serious danger of another Trump presidency. You understand that there is one candidate on the ballot who will respect and uphold our democracy, one candidate who will represent the US with dignity and class, and one candidate who will stand up for women's reproductive rights and the rights of all Americans. You understand, and yet you may find that when you try to talk about this with the younger, seemingly burnt out, disengaged people in your life, those conversations don't seem to move the needle very much. If this resonates, you are not alone. MVP knows that the most effective way to shift voter behavior and get people out to the polls is not to have their relatives beg them to see reason. Instead, MVP invests in grassroots organizations that will send young people as trusted messengers into communities to have these important conversations with other young people, leveling with them from a place of affinity. So at this moment, as I'm observing a clear and obvious need to re-engage a significant group of voters, I cannot imagine anything more important than what MVP is doing. Supporting MVP tonight means supporting efforts to mobilize young voters whose support is absolutely, without a doubt, required to beat Trump in November. So thank you everybody for being here. And with that, I will send it back to you, Janet, I think.
Thanks, Sarah. That's amazing. As I put in the chat, it's so great to hear. I know you just don't consider yourself a young person, but it's great to hear from a millennial. The perspective is important. We're all hearing it from our children. We are going to close out the official part of the program with an amazing song by Belle Halpern and her group, What the World Needs Now. And like I said, we will be around to answer all of your questions after that. So,
and Janet, I'm sorry, we have an update on our matches.
Oh.
So we've gotten over 14 contributions of $1,000 or more. So we reached our match on that, and we reached our $10,000 match, and we've raised almost $60,000 tonight.
Oh my gosh. Wow. We started with about 25 and now we're up to 60. That's incredible. Thank you guys so much. Keep giving. Please sign up to host a house party, and we are going to listen to What the World Needs Now.
Volume. Sound.
We can't hear the sound.
Sometimes what happens is you have to say share sound when you share the screen at the very beginning.
Yeah, we have to start again. Sound is important here.
Well, while we're waiting, we have to win in November. Period. No options.
Absolutely. And also, I'm just blown away by everybody's generosity. Thank you so much.
Good evening. We are what the world needs now, Interfaith Coalition Singers. This little light of mine.
My name is Belinda Halpern, and I am one of the co-hosts of tonight's MVP fundraiser. And right now is the moment to dig deep.
I'm gonna let it shine.
I'm so moved, I'm doubling my donation.
Let it shine.
Join me, will you?
Let it shine.
Donate now.
Let it shine.
Sing along at home.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Get on out and give, and let your little light shine. Get on out and give, and let your little light shine. Get on out and give, let your little light shine. Give today, don't delay, right away.
Walking in love, living in hope, giving to the MVP.
Walking in love, living in hope, giving to the MVP. Walking in love, living in hope, giving to the MVP. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. With MVP, you and me, fighting for democracy. With MVP, you and me, fighting for democracy. Fight! With MVP, you and me, fighting for democracy. Give today, don't delay, right away. Give today, don't delay, right away.
All right, that was amazing. Thank you guys for coming. We are exactly spot on time. It is 8:01. That was terrific. Such a fascinating discussion with Steve, Alva, and Rich. I see some questions in the chat. I want to look around. I haven't been able to find on my chat. Is Regina Clemente here?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, Regina. So Regina is an MVP staffer. She's actually one of our senior advisors. And so she's here to take questions for MVP. Steve, Rich, and Alva are here to take questions about their presentation. I know some people have put them in the chat, but I haven't been able to follow the chat. So if wants to feed the questions out, that would be great.
Sure. So one of the questions that came in is, what are we thinking about the uncommitted voters and the protest voter in Michigan, and Minnesota, and what do we think about getting those people back for the November election?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. honestly, the uncommitted voters in Michigan are some of the most tuned in voters out there, as are many of the other uncommitted voters in a lot of the other states. They're the folks who are paying attention and connected to organizing and get the difference at the end of the day or the end of this year between Trump and Biden. So I'm not worried about the uncommitted voters. This is what we do as organizers. I've been a lifelong organizer since I was 15. And you know, in primaries, you try to push your party to be better than you think it is. And we may have differing opinions on this call about what that means in this circumstance, but this is the time for activists to come out and to do this kind of work. And what we need to be focused on more than that are the folks who aren't coming out right now and who aren't going to come out in November unless we have conversations with them, unless they get multiple touches, and unless they hear from ideally trusted messengers in their communities. And so, we understand the concern around, we all have to be behind Biden right now. And the reality is Biden doesn't relate to a lot of the communities that we work, or he doesn't resonate with a lot of the communities we're working in, but they're going to get out and vote for him anyways, these uncommitted voter folks right now. And we have to make sure the folks that aren't planning to vote at all are the ones that get out and vote.
I saw a question in the chat for Rich and Alva about how you initially got in to the cult of Trump. Do you each want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Alva, ladies first.
Thank you. I'm actually a lifelong Democrat. I've always been a registered Democrat. I took a job of what I thought was to organize a rally because I used to be an event producer, and a family friend asked me if I could help organize an event, a rally. And so it went from me organizing this one event where 30,000 plus people showed up. And then I found myself thrust in the middle of a campaign, like a presidential campaign. Like I said, when I joined, he was polling 18th. He had always been a Democrat as well as, you know, something that I'd always had heard. And so I didn't think he had a chance of winning. And then I didn't think he would be as extreme as he was. But I've always been a lifelong Democrat. Never changed my party affiliation. I didn't even vote for him in 2016. I took a job of what I thought was doing a rally. And then the next thing I knew, he had, you know, I was in the middle of a presidential campaign.
And Rich?
So I just have to say that when I published my first mea culpa was August of 2022. I wanted the world to know that I had remorse and repudiated MAGA. I actually did not think that anyone would care. So I'm glad I was wrong about that also. When the 2015 election got underway in the campaign, I was a very, very anti-two-party system guy. And I figured out with Donald Trump that both parties did not like him. Now, depending on one's perspective, some might say, well, that makes him an awful candidate. I thought the opposite because I saw him as someone who was willing and able to come in and obliterate the established political order. And I came to realize that that is also, like the insurrection years later, antithetical to democracy. So when I decided to delve deep into the campaign, I believed and I allowed myself to be influenced that anyone who was not supporting Trump was on the wrong side. They were on the wrong side of history. We were the right side. We were the good side. We were the real Americans. And I want my own story as a person who was not a Republican or a Democrat. I want my story to be instructional for others to help the public understand that it's much easier to fall prey to a lot of the right-wing mythologies that we are around. And in my case, I allowed myself to succumb to those very quickly. And it's why I always emphasize that I feel responsible. I have my own agency, as each of us do, and I take accountability for what it is that I did, and my rhetoric and my votes and my activism. So as someone who was contributing to some of the ills we see today, I want to now be a contributor to resolving some of those problems. And that's what MVP is doing. And the fact that the fundraising is where it is right now, thank you all for your generosity. Let's keep going and let's just make sure that we have the resources necessary to make this a resounding win in November.
May I just add one question, even though it wasn't addressed to me? So one of the things that I learned is that there are 40 to 50 million Americans who are part of what's called the New Apostolic Reformation Network. And the media is not covering this properly, but these are represented as Christian evangelicals. But what makes them cults is they have self-appointed prophets or apostles who claim to speak to God, who told them that Trump won the election.
Yep.
And they do brainwashing, bite model brainwashing, convincing their followers that the media is satanic, the Democrats are satanic. And so any information that says that Biden won the 2020, that's a demon trying to attack them. So I'm now interviewing a lot of Christians who actually know the Bible and love Jesus and are like, this is not Christianity. And we can mobilize a lot more activity to get people who are in the cult of Trump out of following their apostle or their prophet, in which case they will then start voting like human beings who are thinking for themselves. So I just wanted to add that piece, because a lot of people don't realize that.
May I just add a quick point on that?
Sure.
One of the motivations for starting Leaving MAGA is the public underestimates the power of community, and MVP provides a community. Democracy is about a community, and MAGA provides a community. So I wanted Leaving MAGA, as we get started off the ground, I want it to be a new community for them, for those who have left, for those who have remorse, for those who right now are having doubts. And I think that we're uniquely positioned to empower others to decide to leave MAGA and tell their stories publicly, because that's going to be the strength of the organization. And as part of developing leaders to do this, there's also another crucial part, which I believe is directly related to democracy, which is reconciliation. It's going to be very difficult to have a highly functional democracy when tens and tens of millions of Americans are estranged from and alienated from their families. And as evidenced, Steve, by yourself, Alva by yourself, and in my case, it's not easy to leave our environment, because we invested, as I did, we invested everything a person can invest, from our life and our money and our spirituality and everything about us, our being. And then there's that one of the more frightening parts, and I would say for some perhaps the most daunting part of it, is leaving that community. So that's real.
My friends thought I was crazy.
Yeah, same.
They were
Same
like,
here.
we've known you for 20 years. Like, this isn't you. And then but thankfully my friends were there for me when I left. I left very abruptly. I left the day that Access Hollywood came out, because at that point I couldn't, no one else could convince me of what I didn't already know at that point. Before then, I was being convinced. I was listening to, oh, well, he's not really like that, or this is not just really him. But then it's hard to turn a blind eye to something that you know is a fact. But my friends were there for me when it was over, but they thought I was nuts, because they said, we've known you for 20 years. This is so unlike you. When you talk about the community, when they have all of these little mini organizations, and it literally becomes their entire lives. They become isolated from their family. They become isolated from their friends. Their friends are other people that's a part of Women for Trump. I mean, which is an oxymoron in and of itself. But it started off as like one chapter in West Palm Beach. Now in Florida, almost every county has a Women for Trump chapter. They get together year round. They get together multiple times a month. And so there are all of these tactics that he has used in so many different ways, where they all lead back to one thing. And the one thing that it leads back to is him getting in office again.
There is something that happens that changes people with these MAGA and right-wing mythologies. And I think that there are two seemingly conflicting beliefs that can harmoniously exist. The first is that we're responsible for our actions and our votes and our rhetoric, but also that people are susceptible to, as Steve would put it, undue influence. And I don't mean to make it in a sound in a kind of supernatural way, but something changes inside of people. It changes the unseen. It's their soul. It's something in their being that makes people feel these, as we see with so many MAGA Americans who I believe deep down are good people. And while some here may disagree, there were some valid reasons, I believe, for supporting Trump's campaign. I don't believe those reasons are valid any longer. So we see that the MAGA movement keeps people traumatized, and it keeps people feeling desperate and feeling panicked. And that is one of the superpowers of the right wing. But it doesn't have to be that way. And we're the living proof that people actually can leave. And so that's the work we're really committed to. And I want everyone who knows others who are in MAGA, I know that there are feelings of desperation themselves. My mom, my dad, my brother, my sister, I feel like they're hopeless. They're lost to MAGA. And I want to implore everyone, please, if you've got friends and family in that situation, do not give up on them. Because if my own friends had given up on me, I would not be talking with you right now. And my MAGA family was my second family. And as much as I wish this weren't true, I'm transparent in acknowledging this. Sometimes my MAGA family took precedence over my own family. And that happened. And it happened a lot more than I wish to admit. But it
Love
did.
is stronger than mind control.
And I want this story to be one that people hear and give them some feeling of hope, that it doesn't actually have to be this way. And it's a long-term endeavor, but the American experiment is a long-term endeavor. And our democracy, though it's been uneven progress, one of the reasons that we have remained the only democracy in world history to actually survive is because it has happened many times in our country's history from the beginning days of our republic, where we have seen unlikely but necessary alliances. You know, the Haley voters for Biden. That's an unlikely alliance, but they see the necessity in joining forces to go ahead and keep strengthening this democracy and this experiment in this union. So I don't believe this experiment in self-government is ready to come to an end, but nobody should construe that as reason not to vote.
Right.
So there's a question that I think Regina is probably going to be the best suited to answer, which has to do with how our groups how do we MVP or our groups communicate the issues that we're hearing on the ground to elected officials or the Democratic Party?
Sure. So yeah, elections are one part of what our groups do. What they're doing the rest of the year round, in between elections, which are also every year and seemingly year round these days too, because we work on local, municipal, state, and federal elections work, basically from prosecutor races to presidential, our groups work on. And in between that, they are doing accountability work with their Democratic legislators. They are doing persuasion work with their Democratic legislators. They are, lobbying around policies at the state legislature and locally. And they are participating in national campaigns that tell Democrats, how they feel and what they want. In addition to our groups doing that on an ongoing basis, we have state advisors embedded, at least in our top priority states each political cycle. And they're trying to work with the entire ecosystem in a state, and that includes the party. And so through those relationships, messages can be related in terms of, man, do we want to get all of our voters out for you? And man, is this issue making it a lot harder? Do you think there's any space for the party or a candidate to, reconsider where they are on this? And that's obviously a big lift, but it's something that through the ecosystem work is possible. And we've seen in states, parties and movement groups get a lot closer and be able to work together through those kind of relationship building efforts.
Thanks, Regina. On the other end of the spectrum, what is MVP doing to help voters who are being kicked off the voter rolls, especially in swing states? This was answered in the chat, but I'd love for everyone to hear it.
Sure, it may have been answered more eloquently in the chat than I will answer it right now, but in general, voter access and voter protection is a big focus of MVP groups. And so there are so many steps that can be taken before the election to try to increase election security, and that includes not getting people wrongfully kicked off. And so our groups do everything from working with Secretary of States to working with local elected, local election offices to both be figuring out the problems that happened in the last election, how we can prevent those in the upcoming election, as well as then doing the best to support voters on actual election day or through early voting processes or absentee voting processes. Because yeah, first step, let our people vote.
Terrific. And then Howard asked in the chat, even if Joe Biden wins the election, how do we ensure the results won't be overturned from within Congress by Mike Johnson and company? And does MVP have a strategy for helping to counter such a move?
Sure. Strategy A, win Congress. So as much as we can be in these states that you saw up in the map earlier, you know, we all know kind of the Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina. We think less about states like Montana and Ohio and Nevada sometimes. And so that's one of the reasons I work at MVP, is because we do have a strategy that every cycle is looking at where we need to make the investments most strategically for the best electoral outcomes, as well as supporting those groups year round to be able to do all of this other critical work around voting access and policy change.
Thanks. I do want to note that it's 8:15. We still have 170 of you on the Zoom, and we're going to answer every last question. Well, I don't know. The State of the Union starts at 9, so maybe we'll have to hop up and go to that. But Peter Kovner asked, does MVP coordinate with like-minded groups so that there is synergy and not overlap? Vote vets, for instance.
So MVP is very focused on supporting ecosystems. We understand that organizing work is hard, long work, and it's a lot more fun to do and a lot more effective if we're working with the biggest tent of folks who can kind of be on the same page moving things forward. And in terms of the vet question, I don't have a specific answer to that. I would say if there's great groups you know of in these states we're focusing on that you think we should be in connection with, you can always let us know at any of the email addresses on our website, or regina@movement.vote to get to me. But we are, you know, we start at the core of supporting and funding organizations that are youth and BIPOC led specifically. And then we go out from there. As soon as we have more resources in a state, then we're also being able to fund organizing in rural white communities. I myself have spent a lot of time, I live in Idaho, we're pretty red, and I have done a lot of work with MVP in predominantly red, predominantly rural states for these upcoming elections. But we're doing the same thing in these targeted states in the predominantly red and rural counties. And so there's so many points of entry and so many different groups coming together in this really beautiful way. One quick example, in Nebraska, I was working with a coalition of kind of old school white farmers and new school, or maybe the oldest school, indigenous farmers coming together to do civic engagement and to do turnout around food issues and agricultural issues. And so there's really a wide spectrum. If something ends with justice, we're probably very interested in learning out how to fund it. And we need a lot more resources to keep going from like our inner circle of BIPOC and youth led to everything else.
Terrific. I do want to give us a fundraising update. I don't know if you saw it in the chat. We're over $80,000, and that doesn't include the $10,000 match. So we're actually at $90,000, or maybe even more than that with some other the matches. I have to. That's a lot of math for me right at this hour. But amazing. I think we can get to 100. What do you guys think? I think at this point, if people want to ask questions, just use the raise hand function so that you pop to the front of the screen, and we'd be happy to call on you.
I have a question for Regina. I don't understand why there isn't more focus on Putin's influence of members of Congress, Trump. I mean, there's overwhelming evidence that he was recruited by Russia, Trump, decades ago, and I don't understand why there isn't more clear messaging about Putin wanting to destroy the U.S. as the Soviet Union fell.
Yeah, so big picture, I'm not super connected to understanding kind of like the party messaging, but in terms of groups that MVP funds and the constituencies we work with, that's just not what resonates with most folks. Most folks aren't thinking on a daily basis about Putin or anything generally having to do with foreign policy. That's different in a moment right now to some extent because we're seeing kind of an anti-war mobilization happening, especially on the left. But what our groups are doing is trying to ground voters in, even if you don't really relate to Biden, even if you're pissed off about a bunch of different things that Democrats have done, like, who are you voting for? Who do you love? And like, how can you go out this election cycle and vote for the people you love about the issues that matter to them most? And that's a lot more like housing and healthcare and police accountability and the issues that on a day-to-day basis they're dealing with. And so for our groups trying to like get the Putin message across, it's just not really meeting them where our communities generally are and where most people, I think, that are not voters or are very low information voters are.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it should be done at other levels. It's just, I think, not something MVP is taking on.
Thank you.
Anyone else with questions?
I have one, but I can't figure out how to raise my hand on here.
You
so
can
I
just ask it, Sarah.
Okay. Usually I know how, but I don't know. I can't find it under pressure. I'm curious. I don't have like a fully formed question on this, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to ask Alva and Rich something about like what you guys would identify as maybe like the topics or issues that might be the most low hanging fruit as far as points of connection. Because I feel like the things that really divide the two parties, or at least the left and the right, those are much more obvious. Like if you were in the mindset of somebody on the Trump side of things, what would be like an entry point to like a productive conversation?
Find common interest. I think for me, it's really about genuine connection. And so it's what do we have in common? You know, if it's music, let's talk music. If it's films, let's talk film. You know, if it's books, find something that you have in common with the person that allows them to kind of discard themselves, like to kind of pull their guards down and to maybe feel a little bit more trusting, maybe to give a little bit more information. But I just believe that genuine human connection, find the things that we have in common. Some of the things, because I was with the campaign so early on, and because I did work with finding the data to help that eventually they use to micro-target people, I now spend a lot of time going back, looking at some of I have like all these volunteer lists of people showing up to the campaign office saying, I don't know why I'm here. And I would sit and I would listen to them for hours. You know, the rest of my colleagues would say, why are you talking to this person for so long? But because I genuinely cared about why they were there. But now I spend time going back and looking at some of those same people, going through their social media. And then I go back like 10 years ago. Like, who was this person then? Who was this person before they were radicalized? Because most likely that person is still in there. It's just that they're so disconnected from who they were. And so just having genuine connection, finding things that you have in common, having the conversations, and then people tend to kind of open up a little bit more if they're not on guard. They feel less judged if they know that they do have something in common with you.
Yeah.
I want to just jump in, if you don't mind, Rich, 1 second, and
Sure.
just say, I love asking people what's their first memory of Trump. And they'll often say, I thought he was a jerk, or I knew he was cheating on his wife, or I saw him on The Apprentice and he was an arrogant SOB. So I try to get what Alva was saying is so vital. Get them before they got converted to re-access who they were and what they were thinking, and then ask them, what was it that started getting you to take him seriously? Or what was it that got you involved? And understand how their minds got hacked, because a lot of it's propaganda videos online. So, Rich, you wanted to answer the question.
Yeah, so if we were to watch a MAGA version, a Republican version of this type of event a lot of the statements and concerns would be identical, actually. And
Yeah.
so there would be concerns about the end of America, and we must do everything in our power to prevent President Biden from getting reelected. And if a Trump voter, someone with very strong pro-Trump feelings and someone with very strong anti-Trump feelings, actually spoke long enough, they would find the horror of actually agreeing on some issues. Of course, I say horror with some sardonically here, but the reality is that it would happen. And one of the challenges for those who have very strong anti-Trump feelings, which I understand, is that they have to put themselves in a position to accept the truth, which is that the rhetoric about Trump voters as uncouth and stupid and fill in the blank, what that actually does is it strengthens the bond between Trump and supporters. Because when I was in MAGA, every time the press or Mitt Romney or Paul Ryan or Nancy Pelosi or President Obama said something about Trump, an attack on him, we viewed that as an attack on all of us. His integrity was impugned. We were impugned. So one of the suggestions that I have started to find that has actually worked well, and it's been with those who have come to me and said, Rich, I feel desperate. My dad was this lovable guy before 2016, or my brother was a person, we used to talk sports all the time, and then all of a sudden he became this angry, hateful person. One of the questions that I have found that has been starting to work is I've said to them, if you approach that Trump voter and say, I understand some of the reasons why you support Trump, why you'd like him to be reelected, but do you understand some of the reasons why people oppose him? Do you understand some of the reasons why others want President Biden to be reelected and not Mr. Trump to be reelected? And that is a question that Trump voter has probably never been asked. And there is a certain benefit in that first, because you will introduce something that relates to them, humanizes them, and gives them some consent to start. Because Steve, you talk about consent a lot in your work, and that's really crucial here. And there is no miracle or magic elixir, but I know what doesn't work. And what doesn't work is a lot of the statements that we hear about Trump voters. It is simply turning them further away from us and closer to Trump and the MAGA. And the reason we don't want to keep doing that is because the closer that they get to MAGA, the harder it is going to be for them inevitably to leave MAGA. So we don't want that. I understand those strong anti-Trump feelings. I guess somewhat ironically, I might have with Alva the strongest anti-MAGA feelings amongst most people we probably know. Yeah. So, but I think, and it requires discipline. It requires some discipline, and it requires some of those who are feeling that they've lost their friends and loved ones. They haven't, but we have to make sure that we don't continue to alienate them and push them away from us, because we push them away from us, it simply pushes them toward Trump
and we have
the
to
MAGA.
remember there's over 50 million people radicalized by him. Over 50 million people, that's a lot of neighbors. That's a lot of people. And it's, and the perception that people have of Trump supporters just isn't really accurate sometimes. I remember the volunteer bases when in 2016, they were doctors, they were lawyers. They were people who could actually afford to not have to, that could afford to not be at work to volunteer their time. I mean, they were well-to-do people who were a lot of his initial donors, a lot of his initial supporters as well. But yeah, I just, for me, it's all about human connection. And I just say, find something that you have in common and allow them to open up.
There are a couple of people that have been waiting to ask questions, and I want to be respectful of them. And then I think probably after those two questions, maybe we should decide to call it a wrap. But this has been an amazing, amazing evening. So Linda Hirsch and Dorothy Weitzman are waiting. Why don't we let Linda go first?
Well, this has been amazing, and I want to thank all the organizers, some of whom I know. My question is something that I don't think anyone has asked yet. Years ago, I saw that the Supreme Court was going to play a major role in our lives, not just for the past few years, but far into the future. And I've been heartsick, literally heartsick, about the imbalance and so forth. Why hasn't Biden, maybe I'm just ignorant, why hasn't Biden nominated a single Supreme Court justice? Is there no way to help reestablish some sense of balance? I'm worried about the future. That's where my heart is. I have kids, I have grandkids, and all of us have friends and people who want the future to be much more hopeful and less fearful. Fear has been a major motivation used very skillfully. And if we can't trust in our three-part government, especially the Supreme Court, then, you know, it's a very dire prediction for the future. Why hasn't there been anyone nominated by Biden?
There's no vacancies.
I think you make a very strong point about the Supreme Court. One of the reasons why, one of the many reasons why the election is so crucial is if you think about it, there are the potential for 2 seats to become open with Alito and Thomas. And so if you think about even the possibility that if Trump could get back into office, we're talking about generations and generations of horrible policies. And so the Supreme Court, I know that people are talking about it just the same as you're aware of it. Yeah, that's a very real possibility. I'm not sure why they want to expand the court.
We need a supermajority, right, Regina?
Yeah, we need the supermajority.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Alvin and Stephen said it perfectly. We got to win the presidency in Congress, because when the court vacancies come up, we got to be prepared to be able to fill them. And then we have to have a supermajority and not someone, say, like Mitch McConnell controlling the Senate, that doesn't allow us to appoint them when we have the chance. And so we need not just enough numbers, but we need enough folks in Congress who are really going to fight for the best court in the future. And we're in a real tough place with that right now. So yep, immediate defense and offense is winning the presidency in Congress.
I like the sound of offense.
All right, Dorothy, you've been very, very patient. Thank you.
I think my question, I have never been clear in this meeting how people are giving money and then you know about them. Maybe I walked away from the TV at a certain point, or the Zoom, but I didn't know how to give money in a way that you would while I'm watching Zoom. How do I give money and have you know that it's part of this meeting?
There is a donation link in the chat. Do you know how to use the chat?
Yeah, but I didn't know there was a link in there.
Okay, we put it in a couple of times. Somebody just put it in recently. So the most recent link in the chat, we will donate it and will get attributed to this party. We're also going to send everybody who registered an email tomorrow with some follow-up information, and that will also include the donation link. But if you use this one in the chat, that's what people have been using, and it's right there for you. Takes you straight.
I'm looking at the chat right now, and I just see a bunch of messages. Is there a certain
At the bottom, it says there's a blue thing. It says secure.actblue.com. That's what you click, and then it will take your info.
Mine doesn't say it, but maybe
Scroll to the bottom because it's there.
tried to scroll. I believe. Oh, I see. I can go down on the edge. I'm at the edge, and I say link. There's a link. Is that
There you
it?
go. Yep.
Doesn't
So
have a
thank you. I'm going to get off now. Appreciate MVP. Thank you, Misha, for telling me please do this. And thank you to Alva and Rich. You're awesome.
Thank
You're
you, Steve.
wonderful.
And thank you to Steve too. All of you guys were amazing. Regina, thank you for joining us. Everybody, good night, and thank you, hosts. If you want to stay on for a little bit, we'll just do a quick wrap up. If you have a moment, if we're all tapped out, that's okay.
If everyone has any other questions,
Rich.
I'm here. If anyone
Thanks,
has any other
Regina.
questions, I'm
Bye.
here.
So much,
Regina.
Alva,
Nice
Rich.
Thanks,
seeing you.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
If
Dorothy,
anyone
you
has,
be able to find the link, Dorothy?
I did, yeah, just now, but I must have missed the announcement that at the beginning, right?
It came up in the chat a few times, the link. It is hard on Zoom to figure out how to get people a link effectively. I put up a QR code, but it was only up for a few seconds. We need to figure out a better way to solve that one.
done.
I mean, I could see the chat was full of things about thanking, and I gave money. I mean, that didn't seem to be substantive, so I wasn't interested in being in.
Thank you. And we will send
Thank
you
you,
the email
Dorothy.
tomorrow with the link. I'm going to take myself off Spotlight so that we're just in gallery view, I think.
Kathy, can I just ask one question? I don't know how to just educate my sister. She is one of the brainwashed people. So at some point I might just call you and have you just give me a little paragraph. I love her to the moon, but now we can't talk politics, we can't talk religion, and now it's vaccines. So at some point I will reach out to you.
Yeah, Donna, I know it's really hard. And I think some of the links that we're going to have to Rich and Alva and Steve will also help
Okay.
give you that education, probably much more than I can, but you're
Yes.
welcome. Call.
All right. Thank you very much for the
Great.
invite.
Thanks for
I did
coming.
invite a lot of people, so that's
Yay.
great.
Thank
Yay.
you, Donna.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay.
Well, we still have 45 people on, so I think some people probably have stepped away from their computers, but we're happy to have you.
If anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to answer. So I will stick around as long as everyone's here.
Yeah. Thank you,
Well,
Rich. It's been great.
I don't have much else to say other than, wow, that was amazing.
Wow, I know. It's amazing.
And we are like this close to $100,000.
Oh my God.
Fantastic. Isn't that nice?
When we add in,
It's
when we add
so
in the two
exciting.
matches from today, yeah.
Just apropos of things that some of us said, I just love the hopeful messages in the chat. People who have out and out said, this knocked me out of my funk. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves. I mean, it's so gratifying because all the obvious.